Alright, we got a 2001 Ford Escape 2-liter engine, and today we're going to be flushing out the power steering fluid. Now there's probably three ways that we could do this. Well, we could just pull a hose off the reservoir, crank the engine up and just let it run. Well, I don't recommend that because this fluid will come out so fast and then we could probably damage the pump. Alright, the second way is that we could probably pull maybe a crankshaft sensor. And then we could just crank the engine over, which would be a lot slower. Well, in this case, this here crankshaft sensor is behind the catalytic converter, so you can't even get to it. Or maybe we can just pull the fuel pump. But I'm going to do a little bit safer way, the third method, and that's where we're going to be pulling the return line off of the power steering reservoir, and then we're just going to let it, someone is going to turn the steering wheel back and forth, and that way it'll just pump it right out. And we're not running the engine at all. Okay, so let's get started. And we're going to be trying to flush out the power steering fluid. Now here's our reservoir. First thing I want to do is I want to be able to go ahead and just siphon out as much of this here fluid in the reservoir as I can. So we're going to get started on that. Alright, so let's put this here siphon tool in. Let's go ahead and suck up some of this fluid. So I'm going to continue doing that until I can get as much of this fluid as out of the reservoir as I can. Okay, so I got all the fluid out. Now what I want to do is I want to clean this here reservoir. Now there's two nuts. One is over here, one over here. This one is pretty hard to get to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this here coolant reservoir. There are two nuts on the studs. One is right here, and there's one right over here. Those are 10 millimeter. I'm going to take them out, and I'm going to take this here and swing it off to the side so we can get more access here to this here reservoir. Alright, as you can see, I've got the coolant reservoir set over to the side. Now I got easy access to the two nuts here, or two bolts rather, for this here coolant reservoir. So these are 8 millimeter heads, so I'm going to take those two out, and I'll catch you in the next shot when I get that done. Okay, so now I've got those two bolts out for this here power steering reservoir, so you can see that it's free. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to be taking this here return hose off over here on the bottom, and I'm also going to be taking off this supply hose over here. So that's what I'm going to be doing next. Alright, so the reservoir has been removed for the power steering fluid, and just keep in mind that you will have a little bit of fluid that's going to run out of the reservoir no matter how good you get it cleaned out. And so be sure to put a pan underneath. Now here's a look at the reservoir. So the big line, as I mentioned before, that's going to be for the supply going to the pump, and then the smaller line, 3/8 ID or hose or 3/8 OD on this here nipple is what that'll be. And you notice too we got some couple of rubber grommets on there. Now what I'm going to do to clean this is I'm going to be using some denatured alcohol. So I'm going to go ahead and clean it up. When I get cleaned up, I'll get back with you. Alright, so I got the reservoir clean. On the outside I did use some brake fluid here. And also I put some Dawn, after I put the denatured alcohol, let it soak for a while. I just used some Dawn and some hot water, let it soak. Then of course I rinsed it out, and then after that then I took the air compressor, made sure I got everything in here. So it's pretty well dried now. Also I went ahead and cleaned the cap up also. Now as I mentioned earlier, this is the supply hose going to the pump, and this is the return line. Now what I'm going to do, I have a bolt I cut off, it's a 3/8 bolt, and this is 3/8 ID vinyl, clear vinyl tubing, 1/2 inch OD. And I'm just going to take that piece of stub of a tubing here, and I'm just going to push it right up onto this here return port. I'm not going to bother putting a hose clamp on there because it's pretty snug, so I don't think it's going to leak. Now let's take a look at the car. Now here's the hose that went to that return port that we just looked at over on the reservoir. Now what I have again is 3/8 ID hose, and also I have a 3/8 inch barb splicer, so you can see that's in there. And I'm taking the end of this hose and I'm just letting it going to drain right out into this here pan. Right here. Alright, so let's get to the next step. Alright, so I put the supply hose back on the reservoir. So let me go ahead and get this hose clamp. Get it slid back up a little bit closer to the reservoir. Now, as you can see, I put the supply hose back on with this clamp. Now I went ahead and screwed the bolts back in just finger tight just to hold and secure this. So one is over there and one's over there. Because I may have to take this back off again to get easier access to putting this here return hose back onto that nipple. So I could take these here 2 bolts back off, lift it up, and then slide this hose back on. Now for the power steering fluid, I'm using Motorcraft Mercon V automatic transmission and power steering fluid. The next step is jack up the front so your front wheels are up off the ground. You see I got 2 jack stands under there. And I have the rear wheels chocked and the e-brake is on. Now what we're going to do is we're going to turn the steering wheel back and forth to get this here fluid out. So that means to unlock the steering wheel I have to have the ignition switch to the on position. So just so that we're not using the battery here, not quite sure how long this will take. I just went in and disconnect the battery cable off the DC negative on the post on the battery. Okay, right now I have my neighbor Eric. He's inside the car and he's going to turn the steering wheel slowly from one side to the other, and we should see this here brown dark fluid coming out and going down into this pan. Okay, Eric, go ahead and start turning the steering wheel. And you can see the fluid is starting to move now. And then when you get to one side, just go back to the other side. Now I'm keeping a check on this here fluid. We don't want it to get dry down in there where we get air back into it. Alright, Eric, hold it right there and let me put a little bit more fluid in it. Okay, I've refilled it up again, so go ahead, Eric. Turn it back and forth. As you notice, the fluid is still pretty dark, so we haven't got to the new fluid yet. When we see the new fluid, it'll be, you know, like a light pink, light reddish color. Now we can start to see that it's starting to get a little bit pinkish now. We still got old fluid mixed in there. Okay, Eric, hold it right there. Let me put some more fluid in. Okay, refilled it up again. Alright, go ahead, Eric. And that looks like it's getting pretty red there now. Yeah. Now as you see, I got the reservoir back on and I have the return hose back on. Now what I did to minimize the amount of drippage, in fact none of it came out, is I put the cap back on and then I took the reservoir and I flipped it over to the side and then took the hose and just slid it right onto the nipple and then put the hose clamp on it. Okay, so now we got the reservoir, it's pretty much full, and Eric is going to turn the steering wheel back and forth, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for bubbles. So we want to be sure that we get pretty much all this air out of this here system. So he's going to turn the steering wheel back and forth. You can go ahead, Eric. And I'm just going to be watching in here to see if I see any bubbles coming up. Yep, you can hear them. And I can see a little few bubbles coming up. So just keep doing that, Eric. I can hear it gurgling away and see bubbles coming up. So we're going to do that until we get all these air bubbles out. Okay, we got most of the air bubbles out, so now we cranked it up And we're continuing with turning the steering wheel back and forth. And of course we still have the front of the car off the floor. So we're going to do that until we don't see any more bubbles coming into this. And it's sounding pretty good. I don't hear any whining of the pump until you go all the way to one extreme or the other. Alright, everything is super great here. Everything is sounding good. I want to thank Eric, my neighbor here, for coming over, helping me out, turning the steering wheel back and forth. Otherwise, if I did it by myself, it would just take a longer period of time. Me turning the steering wheel, coming out, check the fluid, go back, you know, so save me a lot of time. Appreciate it, Eric.
You're welcome.
And I also want to thank you guys for watching the video. Hope you learned something, and we will see you guys in the next one, and you guys take care.